We believe that some stories must be challenged.
Mm.
Not because they're bad stories, but because they get so popular, they become these cultural anchors. They start to reflect the moral architecture of our own reality, or not.
That framing is so essential for what we do here. This is a continuing inquiry into how mass market fiction, like the massive book we're talking about today, illuminates moral truth, human reasoning, and what we call ethical asymmetry.
Exactly. And to get past just a simple plot summary, we're using serious analytical tools. We're leaning on frameworks like the step-by-step critical thinking model from Paul and Elder just to check our own biases.
Right.
And also an intellectual ethics framework built on Mortimer Adler's distinctions, the Golden Rule,
Yeah.
and even the civic ideals in the U.S. preamble.
And those frameworks, they let us move from just knowing what happens in a book to really understanding why it matters. That's where you get those aha moments.
It is.
Now, before we jump in, we should probably mention for you that we rely on some pretty efficient analysis to deliver this kind of depth. You're actually experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for these deeper, more dynamic book summaries.
Okay, let's get into it with a truly provocative hook.
Yeah.
Our subject today is Rebecca Yarros' Fourth Wing, the breakout romantasy phenomenon that took the world by storm.
It really did.
So forget the dragons, forget the romance for just a second. Let's ask the fundamental ethical dilemma the book poses. What does this story claim about justice when innocence alone cannot protect the innocent?
That is the core of it. We're looking at this text less as escapist fantasy.
Sexy Dragon School.
Right, less as Sexy Dragon School, and more as a detailed case study in how young adults are pressured to consent to and even participate in fundamentally unjust systems. That's the mirror it holds up.
Okay, let's ground ourselves first. The book is squarely in that new adult fantasy romance genre. You have the enemies to lovers, the intense war college setting, and, of course, dragons.
And its success in 2023 and 2024 was just staggering.
It was.
But that timing is so crucial for its thematic weight. I mean, its rise coincided with these intense, real-world cultural debates about censorship, book bans.
The sanitizing of history curriculums.
Exactly. So a lot of readers connected with the plot immediately. They saw it as a direct critique of revisionist history happening right now.
And that central tension is signaled from the very first page, isn't it?
Yeah.
The conflict between duty to the state and duty to the truth.
Mm-hmm.
The core narrative thesis is all about Violet Sorrengail.
Mm-hmm.
She's physically fragile, has a chronic illness, but she's brilliant. And she's forced into this elite dragon rider program, Basioth War College.
And Violet's journey, it forces her to see that survival isn't just about physical strength. It requires moral compromise, and it requires resistance to a pervasive, corrupt state narrative. It's a very specific environment.
So what's the fundamental truth claim hidden under all the drama and action? It seems to be this. A state can hold on to its power by rigidly controlling what its citizens know.
Even if that ignorance puts everyone at risk from an existential external threat.
Exactly. The narrative shows how loyalty and courage, which are real virtues, can be so easily redirected toward the wrong target when the institution you serve is corrupt.
You're loyal to the flag, but the flag is lying to you.
That redirection of loyalty.
Yeah.
That's the mechanism we need to look at next. The whole allegory of propaganda and scapegoating.
This is where we can apply Adler's distinction between just knowledge and real understanding.
Okay.
Knowledge is knowing the facts. So the fact is, we are at war with the neighboring nation of Poromil, but understanding is knowing the context.
Which is
that the state leadership in Navarre is actively hiding the true enemy, the Venin, and their wyvern forces.
So why hide the truth? It seems like it would be counterproductive.
Because keeping that bigger threat a secret lets the leaders maintain internal control. If they told the truth about the Venin, they'd have to admit they made huge mistakes.
And that could cost them their power.
Precisely. So instead, they create a visible, nearby scapegoat in Poromil.
And Basioth War College is the machine that makes it all work. It institutionalizes this control. It normalizes cruelty. When cadets die, and they die violently and often needlessly, it's just framed as an acceptable cost.
It is. And this requires every single survivor to cooperate with that institutional cruelty just to make it to the next day.
So all the fantasy elements, the
Okay.
dragons, the deadly trials, they aren't just scenery. They become this powerful allegory for how states, under the guise of security, create entire expendable classes of people.
The system itself is designed to weed out the weak and reward anyone willing to look away from the moral rot at its core.
What's so fascinating is how closely this mirrors real-world propaganda strategies throughout history. The scapegoating of Poromil, suppressing the truth about the venom.
It's the classic playbook. Step 1, define an enemy that the public never really sees or understands.
Step 2, censor any contradictory evidence. Manipulate histories, lock away the archives.
And step 3, manufacture consent for the conflict through fear. If you're terrified of the enemy next door, you don't ask questions about the much worse enemy that might be just over the horizon.
And engaging with a book like this, looking past the plot to the political commentary, that's exactly the kind of critical engagement we champion here.
It is. We should probably mention at this point that this critique is part of the work produced by Mindful Moments, which is our YouTube channel. We offer AI book analysis, summaries, critiques, all designed to inspire reflection and rational thought.
It's also, I think, incredibly valuable for aspiring authors who want to understand how you can weave political structure into a story that reaches a massive audience.
Definitely.
So, moving into the moral landscape of this story, let's look at Violet's evolution. Her physical vulnerability, her chronic illness, it immediately challenges that hyper-militarized ideal the college demands.
And this is a crucial claim the narrative is making, that bodies that don't conform to some rigid physical ideal can still be places of tremendous agency, intelligence, and most importantly, moral courage.
Her adaptation is the proof, right? She can't use brute strength, so she masters the gauntlet with daggers and ingenuity, not just muscle. And the fact that she bonds atypically with two dragons, Tiernan and Darna, that just reinforces the idea that fitness to serve should be measured by intellect and ethical conviction, not just physical power.
And when you look at the other characters, their choices become these little litmus tests for the audience. You see these deep moral double standards, these ethical asymmetries between what people say they believe and what they actually do.
Who's willing to admit they were wrong, and who just retreats into self-deception to justify the cruelty they're inflicting?
Right.
But wait, let's challenge this for a second. Isn't Navarre's system effective at one thing? Survival. I mean, they haven't been wiped out yet. Does the story accidentally validate the cruelty by showing that brutality is the price of their existence?
That is a powerful challenge. And the answer, I think, is in the narrative logic. The system survives despite its lies, not because of them.
Okay, unpack that.
The book's turning point, and we won't reveal outcomes, shows that the lies about poor meal and the truth about the Venin actively hinder the common defense. The cruelty is an unnecessary distraction that ends up jeopardizing the entire nation.
Ah, I see. So it's a classic failure of authoritarianism. Internal control takes priority over external necessity.
Exactly.
That makes sense. We should also touch on how emotion works as a form of reasoning in the story. I mean, when does intense fear cloud someone's moral judgment about the state's mandates?
And on the flip side, how does empathy, especially for the marginalized, marked ones, clarify moral action? How does it force characters to confront the system's injustice?
The emotional arcs are really just proxies for a rational ethical debate.
They are. The fear of failure and death pushes so many characters into conformity, making them complicit. But it's that genuine, unselfish empathy for the unjustly condemned that gives Violet and others the clarity to choose truth over duty.
So emotion leads to higher rational thought.
In this case, yes. Which brings us to a pretty unavoidable conclusion: the fundamental failure of civic principles in the world of Navarre. If we apply the Golden Rule framework, the test of reciprocity Navarre's behavior is ethically indefensible.
On multiple levels.
A profound structural violation. Just think about the institutional approach to cadet lives. Baziath accepts that a huge percentage of first years will die in training.
And no one in leadership ever stops to ask the simple question: would I accept this fate for my own children?
They wouldn't. That moral double standard is the definition of ethical asymmetry. The whole ethos fails the reciprocity test. And the scapegoating of poor Emile is just that same violation scaled up to an international level.
Right. The regime treats an entire people as expendable, concealing the real threat, when Navarre's leaders would never accept that treatment for themselves.
And to really hammer home the civic failure, we can use the principles in the U.S. preamble as a critical lens. The book shows a state systematically failing every single one, all while putting up a facade of heroism and order.
Let's start with justice. Justice means the law applies equally. Navarre rejects this. It hoards truth and collectively punishes the children of so-called traitors, the marked ones, for crimes they didn't commit.
That's systemic injustice. Inherited guilt, pure and simple. It proves the state isn't serving its people.
Then there's common defense. the most basic duty of protection from external threats.
And Navarre utterly fails this. They hide the real threat, the venin, and misdirect all these resources to the wrong war against Poromil. The leaders are choosing internal political control over the physical security of their nation.
Which is what ultimately drives the whole plot forward.
Right.
And finally, the blessings of liberty. They're an illusion. Cadets are coerced into service under threat of death, information is restricted, and consent is manufactured through fear and manipulated history. Liberty only exists for those at the top controlling the narrative.
So the conclusion we have to draw from the narrative's logic is that the collapse of ideals here is purely structural. The failings, the propaganda, the cruelty, the manufactured war, they aren't just character flaws.
They're necessary functions of a corrupt system trying to survive its own incompetence. Plot, character, and theme all reinforce this rational critique of authoritarianism. It's perfectly woven together.
It is.
So as we kind of synthesize all this, we need to offer a balanced evaluation. We have to acknowledge the book's immense strengths, the high-stakes plotting, the cliffhangers. It's easy to see its mass appeal.
And the genuine lethality of the college environment, plus Violet's vulnerability, that adds an emotional and ethical weight you don't always see in lighter fantasy.
I agree. Its integration of political commentary that focus on censorship and controlled histories gives the book a definite edge over many of its peers.
However, critics are right that it has weaknesses. The prose can be repetitive at times. It leans pretty heavily on familiar academy tropes, and the world-building outside the college is often quite thin.
If we go back to that Adlerian idea of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, the book is strong on narrative knowledge, very strong on the systemic understanding of how power works. But it's admittedly thin on wisdom. It's brilliant at identifying corruption, but it doesn't really explore alternative, non-militarized social orders that could lead to real freedom.
But that doesn't take away from its value as a case study. The specific plot beats, the brutal training, the secrecy, the hostile labeling of dissenters are all concrete narrative evidence.
They model real mechanisms we see in modern states.
Yeah.
Censorship, scapegoating.
Manufacturing consent. The book is an excellent tool for practicing higher-level critical thinking about the responsibilities of power.
So we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. What does this story ultimately teach us about truth, justice, or the human condition?
And more specifically, does this fictional world, in trying to overcome its corruption, actually move toward freedom, equality, and fraternity for all its people? Or does it merely move toward a better managed hierarchy, where the old, unjust system is just run by new, more ethical people?
That's the enduring lesson to reflect on. Click on screen for the in-depth analysis. Subscribe, share, and continue thinking rationally, one story at a time.
Click the link on screen to subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.